All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session. I can appreciate that everyone is attending the session today. And I guess for the PowerPoint deck, is it going to come up, or am I clicking next? No.
The which?
This way now.
He told me to leave you up.
There we go, perfect,
He
all
told
right.
me to leave you up.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Doon. I'm a Senior Director of Technical Account Management here at Tanium. I will actually talk a little bit about my history before I start talking, only because where I come from and what I've done is relevant into today's discussion. Normally, I don't go too deep into sort of where I came from. But, yeah, I mean, my background is engineering, but when I was in university, I really wanted to start working with very large organizations as my first thing. And what I mean by that is my first internship in university was actually in mainframe at IBM. And at that time, I was actually the only intern in all of IBM Canada working in mainframe, because mainframe tended to be, more of a few generations above me. But the cool thing about that was working in mainframe right in university, it gave me experience in sort of large enterprise. So, having the ability to work with some of the largest customers in North America, and that's always been the tone in my career, is working with like very large organizations. So then I was doing consulting with Deloitte, I went into consulting with IBM. I was working at Microsoft prior to coming to Tanium, and basically in all those experiences, I had the chance to work with the largest organizations in the world, down to the smallest. And what I find interesting is, regardless of how large you are, and when I say like large, in Tanium world, our largest customer is 6 million endpoints. So that means like a combination of Windows, Linux, Mac, AIX layers, containers, all that kind of stuff. Even at that range of 6 million down to 500 endpoints, what I find fascinating is the fact that regardless of how big or how small you may be, you face the same problems. I have yet to encounter one customer or any organization that says, you know what, things are good and we have the right amount of staff, right? Everybody always has resource problems, no matter how large or how small that you are. And that's sort of what we're going to get into today around this whole autonomous endpoint management. Because at the end of the day, we have so much data coming into our organization, going out of our organization, and we don't have the resources to analyze all of that data. So what you see here is just, in general, some of the ongoing issues that I tend to see. But when everyone looks at this, you're going to be like, yep, these are all issues that we're facing today. Number one, lack of resources. We have a lot of information. We don't have enough resources to actually manage the information, look at the information, analyze the information. A huge problem that I see as well too is so again, back to my experience, I was heavily focused on the large financials and Government of Canada. A lot of the banks that I worked with and still continue to work with, I always tell people they have what I consider to be the Noah's Ark of point solutions, so two of everything. And what ends up happening is, in any organization, when you have all of these different tools, it takes a lot of different people, different teams, different specialties to analyze the data. These tools were never meant to work together. So what ends up happening is you have an influx of data, lots of people analyzing that data, but no way to really stitch it all together to make a lot of sense. So again, back to the problems that I tend to see, and I'm sure everyone, I don't know, if anybody can tell me, if anybody's not facing these issues that you see on the board, I would love to know, right? Like, who doesn't have resourcing problems? Who doesn't have ongoing issues and lack of people to investigate? Who doesn't have a scarcity of resources? So this is where, basically the whole concept of autonomous endpoint management is going, is how about we actually get something that takes away some of the human elements and analyzes the data for you to actually give you some meaningful insights back. So this is something from Gartner around like, what is autonomous endpoint management? many times when we look at the IT industry, you always hear all of these buzzwords. You know, right now, I would obviously say the buzzword that is very popular is things like AI. A few years ago, it was like everything cloud. But what is autonomous endpoint management? Essentially, autonomous endpoint management is the combination of things like unified endpoint management, vulnerability management, desktop user experience. It's the ability to combine all of the data sets underneath one house and also getting something, and we can call that something like AI, to actually analyze all of that data. Because what a lot of people do or don't realize is the fact that whenever we have a problem in the organization, a problem could be something like we have a vulnerability. A problem could be something like we're missing a patch. A problem could be somebody has infiltrated the environment. All of these problems are actually all tied together. So generally, when we're investigating an issue in an organization, we're looking at it from single viewpoints, but it's actually a holistic problem. Whether your issue is around patching, vulnerability management, performance monitoring, desktop user experience, threat hunting, all of these issues are actually all tied together, but we tend to look at them as separate issues, but they're actually all part of the same issue. And what I mean by that is this. So if you had a vulnerability in your environment, that could be related to the fact that you have a patch problem and you're not patching frequently. And because you're not patching frequently, you have a vulnerability within the organization, and that allowed somebody to run something malicious that's affecting your environment, and that could have been seen when you're seeing performance issues. So the point of that story is just the fact that many times when issues are occurring in the environment, they're actually all tied together, and they're not just singular issues on themselves. So this goes back to my original point, and it's funny because every single day I talk to customers or prospects, they always say to me, they're like, listen, we have so much data within the organization, and we just don't know what to do with it. So it's nice that we have all these different tools that can collect all of this data, but we don't have the resources to analyze it. So, you know, what's the point of having all of this data if nobody's there to analyze it? So what ends up happening is we tend to only look at the 0.1% of data that we actually have the resources for, which means that we're missing a lot of other data. So here's the other thing too. When we start looking at the data within the organization and we start actually implementing change. So what I mean by that is, okay, we see that we're having issues with patching. We see that we have issues with vulnerabilities. We see that we're having issues from the networking side. We have open ports within our firewall. Like, when we start seeing all of these issues and we start implementing change, the other problem that tends to happen is we don't have a way of actually understanding what that change looks like holistically across the environment. Like, how quickly has that change occurred? How is it affecting the endpoints? Has the change introduced more risk? Again, all of this, the biggest problem is the fact that we just don't have enough resources to actually look at all of this data. And, you know, something I'm sort of alluding to, and we're not going to get into this yet, is coming from the Tanium world, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. So a question I actually have for everyone in the room is, who knows what Tanium is? Who here in the room has ever seen Tanium or heard of Tanium? Or is everybody sort of new to Tanium? So I see some hands. So just a question, how do you know of Tanium? Okay. Okay. Got it, okay. So most of the room actually doesn't know about Tanium. So again, if you guys want, we can get into that later on as well. Okay. So again, when we talk about AI or autonomous endpoint management, it's a journey to get there, right? I mean, it's, you know, sometimes people will be like, you know what, just implement AI, it's gonna make your life better. But at the end of the day, in reality, you can't just have something that goes into your environment, knows all of your policies, knows your hierarchy of how you do things, and then just starts doing it, right? At the end of the day, let's use an example. Everyone says you should patch all of your endpoints, but it's not that simple, right? At the end of the day, you have certain servers or certain machines that are patched at certain times, and not only that too, these machines have different levels of criticality. So the way that you're going to patch your crown jewels are going to be different than the way that you're going to patch an end user's endpoint. So if you just go and implement AI, it can't just go around and start randomly patching and rebooting machines. It doesn't work that way. So what this is just talking about is there is an overall journey to get to that point of autonomous endpoint management. And as you see here, it's sort of like some of the steps that we've taken in life to get to sort of that Tesla that's doing the self-driving, right? I mean, we've started off with things like auto rain sensing wipers, adaptive cruise control. Now we're to the point of where you actually have cars being able to drive themselves. And it's interesting because, I personally don't own a Tesla, but a few of my friends do. And I'm still that person that no matter what happens, I would still prefer driving myself as opposed to letting something do it. But the point of that story is, it's just interesting to see that evolution, right? I mean, 10 years ago, if somebody were to tell you that a car could drive itself, we'd be like, there's no way that's possible. Same thing with like autonomous endpoint management. If I were to tell you that there is something on the horizon that can actually manage all of this data for you, inspect all of the data, give you sort of intelligent insights and actually being able to react to that data, that's basically what I want you to know, and that's what's coming down the pipe. And that's also what we're here to talk about today, is that this concept of autonomous endpoint management is something that is real, but in order to get to that endpoint, there are steps that you need to get there. So this is just talking about like, what does the target state look like before you even get to autonomous endpoint management? And before you get there, there's actually a lot of core problems that you need to solve. So before you get to autonomous endpoint management, a couple things. One, your organization needs to stop fighting fires every day and actually needs to go from being reactive to proactive. That tends to be a problem in every place that I see, right? Like, most technical folk in the room, you're probably fighting fires at work, right? You're always trying to solve the next fire as opposed to being proactive. And it's funny because many organizations have like an education budget, right? They say, hey, you know what? If you want to do proactive learning, we'll pay for it. But you're just like, well, I don't even have time to learn new things because I'm always fighting the next fire. So that's number one, is getting a hold of what's happening in the organization today. And the big problem about that is, in pretty much most organizations that I've ever worked with or worked for, the reason why that we're so reactive as opposed to proactive is that we don't even have a real-time view of what's happening in the organization, right? Like, it's kind of like we only know that something is wrong once the house is burning down. We don't know that a spark just happened and maybe we need to go look at that outlet. It's kind of like, oh wait, the house is on fire, we need to go put that out. Okay, the next house is on fire. But what if we actually had a real-time view of what was happening across the entire organization? Like, hey, wait a second, you know what? I'm just using this analogy, kind of like that fuse just blew. Maybe we need to go take a look at that. So from an autonomous endpoint management perspective, the first thing that we need a handle on is what's actually happening in the organization right now, this moment. So something that I want the room to think about is, like, in your organization right now, if you were to log into your laptop, how confidently could you tell me what's on your network right now? How confidently could you tell me, are all of your machines patched? I see some people smiling because right? How confidently could you tell me that all of your machines are patched, what vulnerabilities exist, who's on the network, what users are there? Like, how confidently and how quickly could you tell me this? And it's interesting because a lot of executives, when I talk to them, I mean, there's always two sides. There's one side that they're like, yeah, there's no way we can do that, and there's no way we'll ever get to that state because we're just fighting fires all day long. And then there's the other batch of executives that I talk to that say, you know what, we could figure that out. And I've had personal situations too where I've challenged people. I'm like, okay, you know what? After this conversation, I want you to jump on with your team and show me this. I want you to show me how quickly you can find out if any patches are missing, what vulnerabilities exist, who's on your network, like all of that stuff. And when they actually start digging into it, they figure out, wait a second, it takes me hours or days or weeks to figure this out. So before we even get to autonomous endpoint management, just having an understanding of the current state of affairs within the organization is the first place that you need to get. All right, going on. Okay, so this kind of going on to that point is like, before you get to autonomous endpoint management, where do you need to go? So we've talked about real-time visibility. So question for the room. Is there anyone here in the room, and I'm just curious, because we have some time, that would say that they have a real-time view of what's happening in their organization? And if you do, I'm always curious to hear that. Is there anybody that would say that? Maybe? No? Maybe? Somewhat? So I'll give you an example. It's interesting. I was on a call. There's two individuals here from Tanium on the sales side and marketing side. And I was on a call with Kevin the other week, and we were talking to a customer about patching. And I was like, what do you use for patching? And the guy was like, we use Qualys. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, we do all of our patching with Qualys. I'm like, I doubt that that's the case. And he's like, no, that's the case. And then somebody else came on the phone and they're like, well, actually, no, that's not true. We do vulnerability scanning and patching of those vulnerabilities with Qualys. We use WSUS for our server patching, and then we use PDQ for their desktops. So that's actually three different tools there, right? Qualys, PDQ, and WSUS. So if you wanted to actually figure out if patches were missing on your endpoints, you're actually going to three different tools. So again, when it comes to real-time visibility, you're jumping between tools to figure out what's going on, right? You're jumping into maybe CrowdStrike from an EDR perspective. You're jumping into PDQ, Tanium, NinjaWire. I mean, you're just jumping in between tools. So that is a problem in itself. To get real-time visibility in your organization, you would have to have a team of people talking to each other, all fishing into different tools. And the other thing to think about too is this. In your organization, think about all the tools that you use. They all have a different timeline in terms of how they pull data, right? Whether you're using something like PDQ or Intune or NinjaOne or SCCM or CrowdStrike or Centa, I mean, I can go down the list. All of these tools have a different timeline in terms of how often that they pull that data. So again, real-time visibility, you could maybe achieve it in certain areas within your organization, but not from a broad perspective. Number two, is there any organization in the room here that you would say that you're still predominantly on-prem? It's like, out of all you're predominantly on-prem. Why is that? Just out of curiosity. Okay. So it's interesting because, as I mentioned before, like, you know, I work heavily with the banks and government of Canada, and obviously in the federal space, you have a lot of on-prem, right? Because, you know, if we use examples like Department of Defense, they have a lot of on-prem stuff for various reasons. A lot of the banks, obviously they've had cloud strategies for a long time, and they're just starting to get there, right? And also from the education space as well too. But you know there's going to come a time where it has to move to the cloud, right? And the reason for that is this, is like, the longer that we stay on-prem, this goes back to fighting fires. It's like we're fighting the wrong type of fire, because now the fires that you're fighting are like hardware issues, BIOS issues, CPU utilization, disk space. Like these are nowadays technically they should be more of the basic issues, but yet we still spend a lot of time doing that, right? So before we even get to endpoint, like autonomous endpoint management, it's like solving some of these core problems. Cloud migration, I've been hearing that term for the past 15, I don't even know, 10, 15 years, but yet a lot of organizations, especially in the federal space, education, financial sector, are still on-prem. So again, this is sort of like, kind of like me rubbing this in, is that the fact that before we even think about AI strategies or autonomous endpoint management, we have to solve these core problems within our organization. So one is real-time visibility. Can you tell me what's going on within your organization right this moment, but across the spectrum? Number two, moving to the cloud. And the reason why I say that is because dealing with hardware isn't something that we should be spending our time on, right? I mean, we should be actually proactively using the software within the organization. We need to be more strategic. And that just dealing with hardware is more of an archaic thing. But again, I know it sounds archaic, but we all know it's still something that we deal with every single day. And tool consolidation. So this is probably one of the biggest problems in the industry right now is in order to get visibility into your organization, you're using so many different tools. Again, SCCM, PDQ, WSUS, NextThink. I mean, you're using so many different tools across the spectrum for vulnerability management, patching, EDR, software deployment, bare metal provisioning, sensitive data discovery, file integrity monitoring, and the list goes on and on and on of how many tools that you use. And here's the other thing too. When an incident happens in your organization, I don't know, maybe everybody's been through this exercise, how many teams of people had to talk to one another to figure out what was going on? And everybody is pointing fingers at each other, right? And it was interesting because when I worked at Microsoft, working like extensively with the banks, part of my job was actually to figure out which team caused the issue. And that was a lot of fun, right? Like in a bad way. But literally like the executives would be like, okay, Ryan, like obviously the entire bank runs off of Microsoft. We need to figure out from what area made the problem. So for me, I would literally get paid to go around for weeks talking to every single team to figure out who caused the issue by not being proactive enough. So this is just some things to think about, right? Because I mean, obviously in conversations that you're having today or whatever else like that is like, oh my gosh, the getting to AI or autonomous endpoint management sounds cool, but if you haven't solved these core problems, you're not gonna get to that next stage, right? And then just the random example was downtown last weekend, I'm sure if you guys know, but one of the more expensive Teslas is like the Tesla Plaid, right? Like whatever. Anyways, this individual in that brand new Tesla made a really stupid turn and smashed into like a 1990 Volkswagen and like totaled his front end. And in the back of my mind, I was like, listen, like, no matter how smart the Tesla is, it doesn't solve you from being a bad driver, right? So point of this story too is like AI is not gonna help you if you're still suffering from the core problems within the organization. So now we'll get into the Tanium world, right? So basically, from a Tanium perspective, for those that are not too familiar with the platform, how much time do I have left? Till 12:15? 12:10? Okay. Yeah, from the Tanium perspective, you know, you can stop by our booth and we could tell you more about it. But basically, right now in the space, we are leading the forefront of autonomous endpoint management. And what I mean by that is, all of those issues that we were talking about, like tool consolidation, real-time visibility, that is the space that we play in, and that's the space that, so from a Tanium perspective, just so you know from our the history, because a lot of people probably don't know this, so our founders actually created BigFix, and then they sold it to IBM. And then, I mean, listen, I'm an ex-IBMer, but software goes there to die, okay? So, and I can say that because I'm an ex-IBMer. So, BigFix, as you know, got sold off to HCL. And what's an interesting story is our founders were like, wow, IBM did nothing with BigFix, and then they created Tanium, and now IBM uses Tanium. So a very interesting story is that our founders actually sold BigFix to IBM. IBM sold it off, and now IBM uses Tanium. So to sell to a company twice, one was selling the entire company, but now it's actually just like selling them the software. But from a Tanium perspective, this is our vision. Basically, we have a real-time visibility platform that does tool consolidation across the board to basically get organizations to that realm of autonomous endpoint management. So we're solving the underlying problems for you, and then layering on top of that, that realm of autonomous endpoint management. So that means that we can pull in a ton of data across the enterprise for you in real time, across patching, vulnerabilities, threat. I mean, basically every silo that you can think of, we can pull the data, and then layering on top of that will be that intelligent insight. The ability to say to you, wait a second, you know what? across the enterprise, you have these machines that are related to one another. They're suffering from vulnerabilities. Here's the criticality. Do you automatically want to create a remediation effort? So, as I said, I won't go too deep into the Tanium world yet, but if you do want to learn more about Tanium, feel free to stop by our booth. All right, so, say again? Okay, so let's pause for any questions. Any questions, anybody? Yeah.
How does the Tanium solution compare to the Microsoft's offering?
Yeah, so that's a good question, good question. So, again, my guy Kevin, we always laugh at each other because every call that we have together, I'm like, oh, I was at Microsoft for 8 years, and he makes fun of me for that. So, but I always tell that story too, right? Because the thing is, every time I talk to somebody, I'm an ex-Microsofter. Because I always tell people too, I mean, you guys, everyone knows this, like the world runs on Microsoft, right? So being ex-Microsoft, I can speak to it. So to answer your question, it's almost like you want to set me up, is we actually have a huge partnership with Microsoft. So our two biggest partners in the industry are ServiceNow and Microsoft. And how does it compare? The reason why so last year, what was the award? Top cloud partner. We were the top cloud partner with Microsoft. And the reason for that is Microsoft has never been a real-time platform. And to the date is not, right? Like for example, Intune works in 8-hour intervals. SCCM is definitely not real-time. So how does it compare? We actually enrich the Microsoft environment. So in many customers, we are the backbone to feed the Microsoft tooling. So that means that now we can populate Sentinel with data from seconds. We can update MDE, we can update Intune. So to answer your question is we are highly complementary to the Microsoft ecosystem because basically, yes, every organization runs off of Microsoft, but now Tanium becomes the underlying tooling to talk to the entire environment. Because the other thing to keep in mind too is our platform works across Windows, Linux, Mac, AIX, layers, and containers. So that means that all of your assets essentially become managed with Tanium, and you can feed that back into the Microsoft tooling. So yeah, we're a huge partner with Microsoft. Any other questions? Yeah, so there's actually this slide. So this is actually our strategy right now with Microsoft of where we actually have our integrations. So if you see here, we actually have integrations with Sentinel. We're again feeding real-time data into Sentinel. Entra ID. This one's a very interesting one. So basically, I still feel like I'm always going to call it Azure AD. I'm not necessarily too comfortable with the name yet, right? But it's interesting because with Zero Trust, we have an integration for conditional access. So that means that before you actually get access to your corporate applications, we can actually check to see if you have the latest software, if your machine is fully patched, if you have any vulnerabilities, and if all those conditions are met, then you get access to your applications. Defender, Intune, so yeah, we're building out a ton of integrations with Microsoft. So to answer your question is, fully complementary strategy with Microsoft. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, I didn't even notice that. All right. So as I said, if you have any other questions, feel free to stop by our booth. And thank you for everybody for joining us today. Appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day.